Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. This is part two of a two-part series in which which continue the series of talks that I'm basing on the African American and the enduring impact of enslavement upon us. Which ties into why we do the things that we do to this very day. There is, I always believe, let me start with this, that for those of you who might be new, my name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and this is the Umoja Circle, is an African-centered talk show whose purpose is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are. Our lives and who we are as a people for over 400 years in this country contradicts the mythos of this being the land of the free and the home of the brave. This idea of American exceptionalism, like I started with the first show, which is a myth that claimed that this American exceptionalism was born through past people seeking a place where they can be free of oppression and have liberty, and there's justice for all. That's what we're taught from the time that we're children in the educational or the miseducational system when it comes to historical truth. But then there is us, the African Americans. We're that 300-pound or 500-pound elephant in the room that every time this discussion is said on the 4th of July or in discussions about American exceptionalism in political arenas or even in schoolrooms during certain holidays or just before holidays, in school plays, when it talks about America and Uncle Sam or the Pilgrims and whatever the mythos is, we are here. And when we speak our cultural truth, not only during Black History Month, but any time and every day that we discuss political issues, economic issues, or medical issues, there's always something that puts us on a different list, a list that is detrimental to us, that shows that we're number one when it comes into poverty. We're health issues. We're having issues there. Now, not because there's something wrong with us biologically. It is the conditions that we live in. If you want to believe any of the scientists who are now coming up with this concept of epigenetics, epi meaning above, the genes, which shows that your genes and your body respond to the environment. Your flight or fright chemicals in your body are a response to what your eyes, what your ears are telling you. And if your environment is dangerous to you, then your hypothalamus, which is found embedded in your brain, sends some chemical impulse to your pituitary gland, which is called the master gland by some in the medical field, and that triggers certain chemical responses to your adrenal glands, which controls your flight or fright chemicals are pushed into your system. Now, for hundreds of thousands of years, that was a system that was put in place that if you're in some kind of environment, then you're getting traced by a saber-toothed tiger or something dangerous, it shuts out all the blood flow that goes to the parts of your body that helps you grow. That's your center, your core. And it sends all that blood to your extremities, okay, to fight or flight, run. So you need that energy. But that system is supposed to be triggered for a few seconds or a minute or so until you get away from that and you go back to normal. But what happens if you live in an environment where those systems are never turned off? If you're living in an environment where you're constantly on edge, you're constantly looking around you, you're constantly wondering what trauma is going to happen to you, that system is not cut off. And what happened when those systems, those chemicals that were supposed to be in your blood system for a few seconds or a few minutes, it's constantly flowing through your system. Say even if you're pregnant, what the pregnant mother has in her blood system flows through the placenta into the baby. Those are long-term ramifications of that. And I'm saying that people are saying, well, what that's got to do with the enduring impact of slavery upon us as people of African descent. Well, if you live in a system of terror where there is rape, where there is whippings, where there is selling of children, which produces trauma over and over and over again, what kind of long-term effect do you think that have on us as a people? Okay? Now, any student of the mind would deal with the psychiatrist, and I'm talking about psychiatrists, psychologists, or any kind of counselor that you might have in today's world, they would understand the effect of trauma. Now, before I go any further, I want to let you know that I'm just not making this stuff up. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't have a degree in psychology, but I do my researches. And what I'm going to speak to you today is based on two books that I got a lot of this information from. The first book was written by a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Naim Akbar. He's been talking about this same issue about how enslavement had an adverse effect on people of African descent to this very day. And this is one of the books that he has. He has a number of books, but this is the one, how to get rid the psychological effect of slavery. And the other book is, I got a copy of it here. It is the book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. It sounds a little familiar to what we call post-traumatic stress syndrome that's been more popular since at least the Vietnam War, that people have been talking about this type of trauma that affect our soldiers, and some of the effects of it, the high suicide rates, But what is trauma? What is this thing? Most human beings can deal with some form of stress. We're built to deal with some type of stress. Dealing with bills and work stress, and maybe overworking a little bit or stressing out a little bit. We could deal with that, but trauma is different. Okay, trauma is an event that is so overwhelming, so extraordinarily traumatic. All right, trauma, Trauma, traumatic, that it overwhelms our normal systems of dealing with this everyday stresses that most of us can. Maybe we need a nap, we need to go on a vacation, we need to unwind, have a little wine or whatever it is that calms us down. But this trauma happens that is so overwhelming. For example, soldiers in the middle of a battle. You got your friends the friend that you were just talking to next to you, he's blown away by a mortar shell. You see body parts going. You're seeing such horrific, traumatic things that it can deal. That one incident or that one time, but if you have it multiple times, could deal with it, for decades. A young child that was raped, a young girl, a young boy at 13, 14 that was raped by a family member or a stranger, that trauma, that fear, that overwhelmed sense of helplessness overwhelms the system. That person will show symptoms, whether it's, drowning themselves in alcohol or dealing with drugs or having nightmares, waking up sweating 10 years, 20 years down the road, or even seeing something. There are people today in 2021 who are dealing with the trauma of seeing 2 planes going into the World Trade Center, who are still on couches, who today can't get on planes. That traumatic experience overwhelmed them systems. So trauma is a real thing. And what I learned from those 2 books, these 2 great scholars who on their own is trying to deal with understanding the trauma that was done to people of African descent after 246 years, from 1619 to 1865 of enslavement, because enslavement was supposedly finished after the Civil War in 1865 and the passing of the 13th Amendment. But then there was another type of structure that was created about 12 years after the Civil War, in 1877, when white men again decided that they were going to let the previous Confederates, traders to America, control their area, and what they started doing was putting back laws, black codes, to pretty much re-enslave black people, regardless of what the 13th or 14th or 15th Amendment said. In fact, they ignored those the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and also the Civil Rights Acts that were also passed during that period of time, because what they followed basically was what was said in 1857 by Roger Taney, Chief Justice Roger Taney, that there is no laws that benefit black people that a white man is required to study. I mean, to not study, to listen to. So whatever laws that says that we are free, 13th Amendment, what laws that say that we have civil rights, 14th Amendment, what laws that say we have voting rights, 15th Amendment, white men don't have to listen to those laws. And pretty much they took it literally in in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, well into the 20th century, that we had to have 100 years later, Civil Rights Acts, in 1964. Excuse me. Voting Rights Act in 1965. Housing Act in 1968. We had to deal with the Southern strategies in 1971 during the Nixon era, which says that we will ignore the black vote and focus on the Neo-Confederacy or the New South, the Republican Party. And that's what they've been doing until to this very day, ignoring us. So Roger Taney's words, regardless of what laws are on the books, is the ethos of white America for some white Americans. And until we have that discussion, then we're just living a lie. this American exceptionalism, this beacon on the hill, this place, this land of freedom, and you're free of oppression, this land of liberty, it still becomes a lie. These 500-pound elephant is still existing as long as we exist, as long as we speak our cultural truth. That's why people don't want to talk about history. That's why they're trying to attack critical race theory, which has nothing to do with black history, because that's what they want us. They don't want us to talk about things. I ended the show talking about the book Beloved, about the Pulitzer Prize winning a book of Toni Morrison in 1988. The fiction but it was based on a true story of Margaret Garner and her husband, Robert Garner, and their families, and her being so desperate after being cornered in a barn in supposedly a free state of Ohio across the Mississippi from Kentucky, where she and her family made it on a cold January night in 1856. That she was so desperate that she didn't want her children to be in the land in America, the state of Kentucky, that she rather kill one of her children. She would have killed more of them if she wasn't tackled, but she killed her own daughter rather than having her go back into enslavement. This is the real story. Beloved is a fiction loosely based on it. What happened to that fictional character was a couple of decades later in the 1870s, but this was based on a story of Margaret Garner. All right. So, and white Americans today with their critical racist nonsense don't want to talk about that, because that's how America has always dealt with the contradiction of the myth of American exceptionalism and the reality of how we people of African descent have been treated in this same country that contradicts the land of the free and the home of the brave. How do you deal with the psychology that is perpetrated, because that affects us as black people, when for hundreds of years we were barred from moving to a different state. We were accosted if we stayed in towns past sundown. How could you deal with the psychology of trying to maneuver through a country that said it's the land of the free, and you couldn't even stay in certain towns after dark, or you would be lynched? I mean, there were certain streets that we could not even move to in certain cities, whether it was in the north or in the south. Neighborhoods. Levittown was one of the first prototypes of a suburban cookie cutter type of environment. There is I think in Washington, in one of the museums, there is actually an exhibition about Levittown, okay? Showing the wonders of what happened in the 1950s, after World War II, and all the soldiers and the GI Bill and the prosperity of America, okay, and everybody moving out of the inner cities into the suburbia. But that was for whites only. Black soldiers who were entitled to the same GI Bill, fought in the same war, were denied the loans, and we even were denied being shown a house in a Levittown. How do you deal with this contradiction of American exceptionalism on one hand, if you're white, based on color, and if you look at the laws, according to critical race theory, when you deal with the laws that put in place certain types of behavioral patterns, like black codes. It specifically says you only benefit from this society if you are white. It was not done haphazardly. That was a deliberate way of thinking. When we built the highway systems in America, there was a reason that it cut through black neighborhoods. It allowed the people in those suburban areas direct access to the downtown area where they worked and their route back to the suburbia, but it cut off all the economic viability of the downtown area for the blacks, because there were no exit ramps to those areas. It was just straight shot, which deliberately killed the viability of black businesses in many major cities, even though in the history books, we are told of the great interstate highway systems that were built during the 50s, which kind of left us out of the picture. So everything that had to do with black viability, black exceptionalism, we had to maneuver around white blockage or white systems that were put in place to prevent us from living that American dream. White had certain privileges. Black were denied those same privileges by law. Do you think the trauma of an enslaved Margaret Garner, who rather kill her 2-year-old daughter than go back into the system? This didn't happen in Russia. This didn't happen in North Korea. This happened here in America. And white America to this very day don't want to talk about that America. They want to talk about a myth that does not exist as long as we exist and speak our cultural truth. That's the issue. Not saying that we don't have doctors and lawyers and all kinds of engineers. That was overcoming certain types of odds, right? We had them. We had them in the 1800s. We had doctors. We had nurses. We had generals. But look how they're expressed. They overcame the odds. My question is, what were those odds that they had to overcome? Who put those odds in place that they had to overcome? And it didn't matter what part of the social economic strata you were as a black person. In order to be successful in America, you had to overcome odds. And the odds were places and things that were put in place by law, blockages that we had to overcome. Don't you think those things had certain types of psychological, traumatic ways of affecting us, that we had certain behaviors that we had to develop to survive in slavery, certain ways of talking to each other in front of master? That's what we call each other by the N-word. You think we did that out of hate, but it made us look good when we called each other the N-word, because that's what master wanted to hear. That got rolled into our culture. There are certain ways we talk about our children. So we downplayed their achievements as a 10-year-old child who might be brilliant, but in front of master, we will say, he was dumb, he's stupid. Because we know if he got master's attention, he could be sold because he's a smart darky. So we do things that did not uplift our children into society, that got rolled into our culture and how we communicated about each other, always downplaying ourselves. On top of the way in which America dealt with the contradiction by them cutting it out of the histories that were taught in school, which showed that we didn't do anything. That was the kind of things that were done to us. And you telling me we don't have certain types of behavioral issues when it comes to dealing with who we are as Black Americans? We have to face these truths. Who are we? Sorry about my throat, postnasal drip. Have a lot of allergies here in San Antonio, so, but I would soldier through. Well, this is an important topic. We're dealing with a lot of trauma. I'm not saying this to say poor Black people. The fact that we are here is a testament to how good and great we are. We were brought here in the 1600s and the 1700s only not to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. We were here to be a throwaway, permanent, working force. And we must speak about our exceptionalism to survive hundreds of years of this trauma and speak this truth. I'm an example of that. My ancestors did not have the opportunities that I have, that I made, that my people made. I stand on the shoulders of those who came before me, even though they might not have the opportunities, but they had to deal with those traumas in order for me to see further down the road to success. I mean, I could say more, but time's over. So until next time, peace.